Catherine Clare, KC for short, received her ticket to the Mile High Club on her first overnight trip as a flight attendant. Destination, Paris-Charles de Gaulle Airport. The Boeing 777 was filled to capacity. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, Chicago time, and most of the passengers were asleep when the steward asked KC to meet him in the aft toilet. This was the first time in her life that she had sex with another man. It was rather not what she expected. He was not what she wanted. He was different from what she had with her husband. She couldn't wait to meet again, so he could do it, so that she would really feel good. I guess we could say this story begins on a hot August day in south-central Illinois. K.K. Morrison grew up on a dairy farm about 3 hours southwest of the big city that is Chicago. Her childhood was typical rural. Household duties included helping her father milk 60 cows before going to school, and so on every evening. And it was 365 days a year, rain or shine. There wasn't even a day off for Christmas. The Williams family owned a farm about 20 miles down the highway. They raised 500 acres of corn and soybeans and also raised a small herd of Holstein cows, which are black and white spotted cows to you city dwellers. Their only child, Matthew, was no stranger to the milking machine either. His parents, however, cut him some slack because he was the starting quarterback on his school's football team. Forward, Rebels! They met at the county fair. Both came in to see the calves at 4 o'clock and ended up next to each other in the dairy barn. The moment Matt saw KC, he thought he had been struck by lightning. The poor child had a hard time getting his mouth to form words. He was delighted to learn that the beautiful young lady was also tongue-tied. They spent a lot of time staring at each other as if the world around them didn't exist. Their senior year of high school was starting in a few weeks, and many kids their age were allowed to sleep in the barn with their animals. They took advantage of the darkness and slipped away to get to know each other better without the grunts of their some 500-pound escort. By the time the sun rose, they had consummated their friendship. 2 virginities given for nothing. The next night, Matt asked KC to marry him, putting on her finger a real 24-carat solid gold ring that he won in the Midway Carnival game. They spent the rest of the fair having sex as often as they could and making plans for a life together after high school. Matt is from Central, and KC is from their arch-rival Lincoln. Matt's cow, Soxy, named after his favorite baseball team, finished without honors. He didn't care. He had his own trophy. On the other hand, KC's cow, Misty, was voted best in show. Her reward for winning the Blue Rebound was a graduate trip to New York. KC returned home looking as if she had seen a glimpse of heaven. She talked a mile a minute about all the wonders she had seen, from the top of the Empire State Building to the subway in the darkest bowels of the earth, with a Broadway play put on to introduce the arts. After KC gave Matt a souvenir t-shirt, she stated, "I'm going to be a flight attendant and see the world. We could move to New York and fly wherever your dreams take us, for free. I can support you as long as you'll go to college and get your degree." Matt wasn't quite sure how this fit in with his parents' plans for him to take over the family farm. The school year dragged on slowly, but they managed to see each other almost every weekend. As winter turned to spring, KC's dream of becoming a flight attendant was rekindled. She made a few calls and learned that the minimum age was only 18, depending on the airline. This meant that she would be old enough 3 months after finishing school. A week after they received their freedom, KC and Matt convinced their parents to let them take Amtrak to Chicago for some sightseeing. She still hasn't mentioned her dream of flying. "You two, be careful up there, and you'll be on the last train back home," her father warned her. "I don't want to hear that you missed it and had to spend the night." KC did her research in the school library and learned that 2 legacy carriers that flew around the world might employ her. Their first stop was United Airlines, where KC was shocked to learn that she had to be 19 to apply. At their next stop, an American city, the minimum was 20. Matt's 18-year-old girlfriend couldn't read the fine print on the applications. None of the other airlines they approached were even accepting applications. In Matt's mind, he was doing backflips in joy, his lips instead mouthing words of comfort. Detained but not derailed, Casey vowed to return the day after her birthday, until Matt convinced her to join him at the University of Illinois. They had been dangling a football scholarship to Matt since the start of his senior year, so he could get at least one free year of college. Exactly a year later, they returned to Chicago, ready to inundate airlines with job applications. This was not necessary since her first choice hired her in place. Getting a job was much easier than getting her parents' blessing, but in the end, she wore them down. "Mom and Dad, you can fly wherever you want with my passes. Free." Who will milk the cows? Her father wondered out loud. Casey completed her training and began her career as a domestic flight attendant, working a scheduled route from Chicago to Milwaukee and back twice a day, 5 days a week, excluding Saturdays and Sundays. It was unlikely that this would captivate her imagination, but that didn't stop her. When Casey finally had 2 days off in a row, Matt took the train and headed north. She met him at Union Station. From there, they went to the mayor's office and appeared before a magistrate. 10 minutes later, Matthew John Williams took Catherine Clare as his lawful wife. They had a nice dinner and then spent the night of their honeymoon in a hotel room, consummating their marriage. Even though they were not of legal age, the concierge sent a free bottle of champagne. On Monday, reality returned. Matt had to tell his parents that he was getting married and wouldn't be coming home. It was a difficult day. Casey shared a small 2-room apartment near the airport with 2 new employees. Their schedule kept the apartment from being too crowded, but it took Matt a while to adjust to living with his wife and 2 roommates. Even though they were beautiful, he never gave in to temptation and treated Kimmy and Joyce like his sisters. Matt lost his football scholarship when he transferred to the University of Illinois at Chicago and had to finance his education through student loans. Money was tight, but they were in love with each other. They made plans for how they would spend Matt's salary once he graduated from school and got a good job. The first time Casey flew to St. Louis, she wrote out a pass for her husband. He got the only empty seat on the plane. It was a center seat in the last row that didn't recline, but he didn't care. He divided his time between studying for his economics exam and watching his beautiful wife work in the Aisley. She fed him well and kept him hydrated with snacks and drinks. They had 2 hours between flights and shared a very expensive dinner at Lambert International Airport. Matt was lucky and even got an aisle seat on the way back. Even better, he got an A on the test. Life was great for the next 6 months. Casey was home every night. At least once a week, Matt would meet her at the gate and they would ride the subway home together. Things got a little tense when both of their roommates were transferred. To make matters worse, their new base was New York City, Casey's dream post. The airline then imposed a hiring freeze to ensure there were no more new recruits who needed somewhere to live. Casey and Matt were now on the hook for all the rent. Matt tried unsuccessfully to find a part-time job. Casey had to take extra trips to make ends meet. She was a tired woman and began to resent coming home and finding her husband studying. They started quarreling over a dozen little things. All this paled in comparison to the money wars that broke out every payday. This made Casey a very vulnerable woman. Unlike most of his compatriots, Steve Kaczmarski preferred to fly with new employees. He used his seniority to work in the aft galley, which gave him plenty of time to get to know the new crew members. That is, female crew members. He was an experienced predator and spotted Casey the moment she entered the briefing room. He checked the list. They'll be flying the 6 a.m. shuttle 20 times this month. That'll give him plenty of time to add another notch to the bedpost. It was Casey's first flight on the Airbus 319, and she was nervous. Until today, it only worked on the Boeing 737. Luckily for her, Kaczmarski was there to bring her up to speed. He immediately began courting Casey. She hugged him when they landed in Washington and thanked him for all his help. By the end of the trip, he had her cell phone number. After their second trip, their texts became much more personal than work-related. Every day when they weren't flying, they talked on the phone. He learned a few things about her and started showing up with little gifts like her favorite cookies. Nothing special, just something to show that he was paying attention to her. Kaczmarski did not hesitate to voice his opinion about the husband who stayed home to read books while his wife worked maximum hours. Over the next 3 weeks, he tried his best to be there whenever Casey wasn't sure what to do, whispering in her ear like a snake. One of the senior flight attendants took Casey aside and warned her, "Listen to a word of wisdom. This airline stewards are guys who have sex with everyone who walks. You're a beautiful woman and you've attracted a lot of attention. You should be very careful with those you consider your friends." Casey chalked it up to jealousy. Plus, she felt in control. By the end of the month, they were as inseparable as thieves, and Casey shared intimate details that should have been her husband's exclusive property. But Kaczmarski had some trouble getting the deal done because Casey wouldn't agree to meet him when they weren't flying. The weekend was so expensive that she wanted to spend it with her husband, if only to quarrel with him again. Everything changed when the team called Casey and told her that she had been transferred to Red Eye in Paris, France, for their anniversary. Matt wanted to come with us, but the plane was sold out. This would be the first night the Williamses haven't spent together since they got married. It took a lot of effort, bargaining, and outright scheduling manipulation for Kaczmarski to get someone with so little experience to fly nonstop to Paris. But he pulled it off. He had big plans and was very confident that Casey would face them during their stoppage. The day before their departure, a messenger arrived with a package for Casey. She thought it was from Matt until she saw the note. "Something beautiful for someone beautiful. Stevie." Casey blushed when she saw the delicate lace lingerie. She called Stevie, "I'm a married woman. I can't accept this." "It's a belated birthday present. Besides, it's what all the women in Europe wear." Matt thought it was their first anniversary, and all plans were going to waste. Since he couldn't fly with her, he wanted to surprise Casey. He used the last of his emergency money to buy a gold chain with a 1.4-carat diamond pendant. It was truly the thought that made the difference. While Casey finished putting on her makeup, Matt went to hide the gift in her rolling suitcase. When he opened the bag, he received the shock of his life. Folded on top to keep it from getting wrinkled was the little black dress he'd bought at a resale store to celebrate their anniversary. She must have been shopping at a lingerie store because he didn't recognize the delicate lace negligee. There were 2 packages of nylon stockings. The back pair of seams were unopened, but the other package was empty. She must be wearing them under her uniform, he thought. Matt rummaged through his bag and found an unopened box containing 6 lubricated condoms in one of the pockets. He could hardly contain his anger as he opened the box. One by one, he tore open the foil packets, unwrapped the prophylactics, and placed them on the black dress. The lubricant acted like glue for marriage killers. He flattened the box of condoms and stuffed it, along with the rest of the packages, into his suitcase. Then he saw the note. He knew it was over. So he crushed the beautifully wrapped gold chain and pendant under his heel and threw them on top of the ruined dress. Lastly, he tore up the anniversary card and placed it in the case before closing it. Matt was very quiet as they rode the train to the airport. Casey was babbling about how she couldn't wait to get back so they could spend a romantic evening celebrating. He knew this would never happen. Casey showed up at the briefing with her passport in hand. She immediately recognized the only familiar face in the briefing room and sat down next to Steve. 2 other stewards were serving the flight, and Kaczmarski enlisted their help in counting the points with the new girl. They also had jump seats in the back of the plane. His place was next to Casey. Even before the plane began to taxi out of the gate, he began to pin his bullshit on his naive young wife. She sat next to the bulkhead and he leaned against her. After commenting on how little space there was, he placed his hand on her leg. Then he leaned over it, pointing at something through the small window. As he did this, her uniform rode up higher and higher. When he felt the lace top of the stocking, he realized that she was wearing his gift, which gave him courage. KC was about to tell him to stop, but then he invited her to dinner at the Jules Verne at the top of the Eiffel Tower to celebrate her first visit to the City of Light. She said yes, just as, unfortunately, the plane was in the air and they had to take their duty stations. 3 hours into the flight, it was pitch black outside. Most of the lights in the cabin were turned off. Without warning, the plane entered an area of turbulence. The captain turned on the intercom. "Flight attendants, return to your seats." The fasten seatbelt light came on. This was when Steve invited her into one of the restrooms. She didn't hesitate. She was stripped down to a lace thong, a shelf bra, a garter belt, silk stockings, and high heels when they entered the small room. Her uniform was neatly folded and placed on the baby changing table. Steve pushed her against the wall. Casey managed to unbuckle his belt and unbutton his pants. She wanted to have some very impressive sex. That did not happen. The room was uncomfortable, cramped, and he did it quickly. By the time Casey remembered to tell him to put on a condom, but it was too late, he managed to do his job and pulled up his pants. He grabbed her panties and put them in his pocket as a trophy. After he had adjusted his uniform, he held the door open long enough for his two accomplices to get a good look at Casey. She blushed and closed the door. As she pulled on her uniform, she thought about what she had just done. She was a little disappointed that she didn't enjoy the sex and blamed it on the small room being uncomfortable. "I can't wait to get Steve into a real bed," she thought. It never occurred to her to feel guilty. Matt found out through the app that her plane had taken off. Knowing her phone would be switched off, he called and left 2 messages. Catherine Clare was the first time he had called her by her full name since they had married. "Your anniversary gift is in your suitcase." The flight crew was walking down the ramp when Casey turned on her phone. She giggled. "I got a text from my husband." A chill ran down her spine when she heard him call her by her full name. As she listened to the rest of the message, horror began to spread throughout her body. She dropped her suitcase and fell to her knees. A crowd began to gather around her. Her hands shook as she opened her bag. When she opened it and saw condoms, she screamed, "No!" and collapsed on the floor. Her chief steward ran up to see what had happened. Kaczmarski was 1 step ahead of her. He was worried that he wouldn't be able to sleep with her again that night. Casey saw him, and something clicked in her. She waved her fists at him. It took 3 flight attendants and a couple of baggage handlers to pull her away from him. The chief steward ordered Kaczmarski to immediately report to the crew wardroom. "If you did what I think you did together on that flight, not even your union steward could save your job." When Casey tried to call her husband's phone, it went straight to voicemail. She began to sob hysterically, begging to be allowed to fly back to Chicago to save her marriage. One of the flight attendants, the same old gray warhorse who had tried to warn her, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I told you her husband would find out. They always would." Casey let out a scream that sounded like a banshee screaming in the night. The chief steward helped her into a chair. "You're not the first naive young wife to be seduced by that bastard, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure you're the last." Her hands shook as she played the second message. "By the time you hear this, I will be gone. I have always told you that there is nothing I hate more than a person who cheats. You deceived and betrayed us. I'm leaving because I'm afraid of what I'll do if I come face to face with you. I hope I never see you again." She fainted. 4 hours passed and Casey finally finished filing her sexual harassment complaint against Kaczmarski. The union representative promised to put her on the next plane back to the States. Unfortunately, this will only happen in 12 hours. Until then, all she could do was keep calling his phone. She sat on the floor of her hotel room and carefully collected the pieces of her anniversary card. She sobbed hysterically when she read what her husband wrote inside. "Casey, you are my best friend, my lover, and my wife. You make me whole. I'm counting down the minutes until you're in my arms again. Happy anniversary, my love. 1 year together lasts forever." She spent a sleepless night curled up on the floor, cursing herself for being so stupid. The next day, she was able to board a plane back to Washington, D.C. The former airline had to have hourly service to and from Chicago. so it had no problem catching the rest of its trip home. She didn't say a word, but everyone seemed to know who she was, or at least what she had done, and treated her like an outcast. Many flight attendants looked down on the player who was caught and then accused of gambling. Casey spent the entire flight trying to think of a way to explain what she had done. The moment Casey landed in Washington, she started calling Matt on his cell phone. Still no answer. She tried her best to compose herself as she left a well-rehearsed message. "Matt, my lover, I really screwed up. I'm so sorry. Please. I know I don't deserve this, but please." She couldn't stand it and started crying. 45 minutes later, she sat in the center seat and flew towards her destiny. Casey left a dozen more messages as she rode in the taxi to their apartment. Her hand shook as she inserted the key into the lock. She quietly called her husband's name, looking around the living room. She was terrified that he could take half of everything they had, but everything looked the same as she left it. She walked through the dining room and kitchen. Everything was in place. The master bedroom looked untouched, but the closet was closed. She gathered her courage and opened the door. All that was inside was a row of empty hangers. She staggered out of the closet and threw herself on the bed. White-hot terror tore through her stomach. Then it got even worse. She looked at her dresser and saw Matt's wedding ring on his cell phone. The room began to spin. She clutched the ring in her hand and cursed herself for ruining her marriage. It was almost 1 a.m. before she could make it to the bathroom. She turned on the shower as hot as she could stand it and tried to wash away the shame. But there was not enough soap to wash the stain from her soul. Casey knew she had to leave the empty apartment. She needed her mother. So she walked into the darkness, praying that her mother had the answer. Casey felt better when she saw the light from the dairy barn. She thought about how many mornings she had spent with her father milking the herd and wished she could turn back time before she made her mistake. The car's tires crunched on the gravel. She was planning to walk home, but something was wrong in the barn. "Uncle Hank," she called, "what are you doing here?" Her mother's brother continued working, responding. "Matt came by yesterday to explain to your parents why he was leaving. You know your mom has had a weak heart for a while now." Casey started chanting, "No, no, no. Please tell me she's alive." "She's alive, but not because of you," Hank replied. "And she had a massive stroke. Your father called from the hospital and asked me to look after the farm. That's what family does." "Which hospital? If I were you, I wouldn't try to visit her. You're the last person your father would want to see." "Is Matt still here?" "No, he left last night after your mom was stabilized. I've never seen a more devastated person." Casey called crew support and left the airline to work on the family farm. Her mother recovered, but was partially paralyzed. The adulteress became her permanent nurse as a form of penance. More than 5 years have passed. Casey was a dedicated nurse who never complained, even when she had to change her mother's diapers. When she wasn't looking after her mother, she helped with the housework. She never played the martyr, not even the day the sheriff served her with the divorce papers. She accepted her fate with silent dignity. One clear autumn day, the angel of death visited the Morrison farm. Mom died next to her husband and daughter. The last thing she said to Casey was, "I love you. Now move on with your life." The funeral took place in the parlor of the old frame house, just as it had been done 100 years ago. Everyone brought something to eat. Stories were told and friendships were renewed. But this was a working farm, and the animals cared little about mourning. Casey was caring for a sick calf when she saw a little boy walk into the barn. "Hey, cows," the 3-year-old announced to the large animal. Casey stared at the visitor. She recognized his face from a black-and-white photograph that her ex-mother-in-law hung on the piano. No, this photograph was almost 30 years old. Her heart was beating wildly. He must be her ex-husband's son. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing. The little boy knelt down in the hay. "Are you okay, lady?" Casey trembled as she studied his face. Uncle Hank must have told him about Mom. The boy held out his hand and said, "I'm Matt, but Mommy calls me Junior." At that moment, All the dreams, all the hopes that she still harbored in the corner of her heart